There's something profoundly moving about standing at the edge of the ocean at dawn. The way the light catches the water, creating paths of gold that seem to lead somewhere beyond what we can see. And as you breathe in that salt air, feeling the mist on your face, you might find yourself wondering, what lies beneath these ancient waters? You know, there's something profoundly moving about standing at the edge of the ocean at dawn. The way the light catches the water, creating paths of gold that seem to lead somewhere beyond what we can see. And as you breathe in that salt air, feeling the mist on your face, you might find yourself wondering, what lies beneath these ancient waters? Tonight, we're going to explore one of humanity's most enduring mysteries. Not Atlantis, though they share a kinship, but something older, deeper, more elusive. A lost continent that may have cradled the very beginnings of human civilization. A place called Lemuria. The name itself feels like a whisper from another time, doesn't it? Lemuria. Say it slowly, let it roll off your tongue. Some say it comes from the Latin word for ghost, lemurs. How fitting for a continent that exists now only in memory, in legend, in the spaces between what we know and what we feel. But here's what's fascinating, and perhaps a little unsettling, about Lemuria. Unlike other lost civilizations that we've relegated to pure mythology, this one was born from science. From the careful observations of naturalists in the 19th century who noticed something peculiar. Picture this. It's 1864. An English zoologist, Philip Sclater, is studying lemurs, those enchanting, wide-eyed primates with their almost human-like hands, that he's noticed something that doesn't quite fit. These creatures, these lemurs, they're found in Madagascar, yes, but also in India, also in Malaysia, scattered across the Indian Ocean like pieces of a puzzle that's been shaken apart. Now, how do you explain that? How do similar species end up on opposite sides of a vast ocean? Sclater proposed something radical for his time. What if there was once a great landmass connecting these distant shores, a continent that bridged what we now see as separate worlds? He called it Lemuria, after those mysterious primates that seemed to remember, in their very existence, a home that no longer was. But here's where our story takes an interesting turn. Because while Sclater was thinking about lemurs and land bridges, others were thinking about something far more extraordinary. What if this lost continent wasn't just home to animals? What if it was home to us? Helena Blavatsky, that enigmatic figure who founded the Theosophical Society, she had visions. Dreams, she said. Dreams of a great continent in the Pacific and Indian Oceans where the first true humans walked the earth. Not primitive cave dwellers, but beings of remarkable wisdom and spiritual power. That in her writings, she described the Lemurians as giants, almost 7 feet tall, with a third eye that could see beyond the physical world. They lived in harmony with nature, she said. They understood the secrets of the cosmos, the language of crystals, the very heartbeat of the earth itself. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like pure fantasy, doesn't it? The stuff of dreams and wishful thinking. But here's what's beautiful about Lemuria. It exists in that liminal space between science and imagination, between what we can prove and what we sense. Because even as continental drift theory explained away the need for Sclater's land bridge, even as we understood that the ocean floors hold their own secrets, the idea of Lemuria, it persisted, it evolved, it found new life in the hearts of those who felt, somehow, that our origin story was incomplete. And you know what? Sometimes the most profound truths come to us not through facts and figures, but through that quiet knowing that sits just below the surface of consciousness. That feeling you get sometimes, looking out over the ocean, that you're home, that you've been here before. That ancient Tamil literature speaks of Kumari Kandam, a great southern continent where Tamil civilization first flourished. The Aboriginal Australians have dreamtime stories of lands that stretched far beyond their current shores. Polynesian legends tell of Mu, a vast Pacific continent that sank beneath the waves. Different names, different cultures, but the same haunting memory, the same sense that we came from somewhere more. James Churchward, an English occultist who spent years in India and Southeast Asia, claimed to have discovered ancient tablets that told the complete story of Mu, his name for what others called Lemuria. According to these texts, Mu was a paradise, a land of 64 million souls who lived in perfect harmony for thousands upon thousands of years. He described cities of gold and crystal, gardens that floated in the air, temples where priests could speak with the very spirits of the earth and sky. The Lemurians, he said, were the mother race of humanity. They sent out colonies to every corner of the globe, carrying with them the seeds of all future civilizations. And then it was gone, swallowed by the sea in a single catastrophic day. But here's what I find most intriguing about these stories. They don't speak of endings. They speak of transformation, of a civilization so advanced, so spiritually evolved, that when their time on the surface was complete, they simply moved. Some say they retreated to underground realms. Others believe they ascended to higher dimensions. Still others whisper that they're still here, still watching, still guiding humanity from the shadows. And perhaps that's what Lemuria really represents. Not just a lost continent, but a lost way of being. A time when humanity lived in harmony with the natural world, when we understood our place in the cosmic dance, when the barriers between the physical and spiritual realms were as thin as morning mist. You see, every culture on Earth has some version of this story. The Golden Age, the time before, Paradise Lost, Eden, call it what you will, but the memory persists. The sense that we were once, more than we are now, and maybe, just maybe, Lemuria isn't really lost at all. Maybe it exists in the spaces between thoughts, in the depth of meditation, in those quiet moments when you're walking by the ocean and you feel like you're remembering something just beyond the edge of consciousness. The indigenous peoples of the Pacific have a beautiful concept. They call it mana. It's the spiritual energy that flows through all things, connecting the seen and unseen worlds. They say that places of great mana never truly disappear. They just wait. They wait for us to remember how to see them again. And perhaps that's our invitation. Perhaps Lemuria isn't calling us to find it with ships and sonar and diving equipment. Perhaps it's calling us to find it within ourselves. To remember that we are more than the sum of our material parts. To reconnect with that ancient wisdom that still flows in our veins like an underground river, waiting to surface. The Theosophists believed that Lemuria would rise again. Not physically, necessarily, but spiritually. They taught that as humanity evolves, as we remember our true nature, the consciousness of Lemuria would return. The wisdom of those ancient ones would flow back into the world. And when you think about it, isn't that happening already? This growing hunger for meaning, for connection, for ways of living that honor both the earth and the cosmos. This rediscovery of ancient wisdom traditions, this quiet revolution of consciousness that's spreading across the globe like ripples in a still pond. Maybe we're not searching for Lemuria at all. Maybe Lemuria is searching for you as we drift towards sleep tonight. Let your mind wander to those misty shores between the known and unknown. Feel yourself standing on a beach that might have existed millions of years ago, or might exist in a dimension just parallel to our own. The sand beneath your feet is warm, the water crystal clear, and somewhere in the distance, somewhere just beyond the horizon, you can almost see it, can't you? Towers of crystal catching the first light of dawn, gardens that bloom in impossible colors, and beings who look at you with eyes full of love and recognition, as if they've been waiting for you to remember that you never really left at all. Tomorrow night, we'll dive deeper. We'll explore the scientific evidence that suggests something extraordinary did indeed exist in Earth's ancient oceans. We'll meet the researchers and explorers who believe they've found traces of Lemuria in the most unexpected places. But for now, let yourself drift. Let yourself float on those warm, ancient waters where time moves differently in dreams. Dreams might just be memories of home. What secrets do you suppose the ocean keeps? And what might it whisper to you, if you knew how to listen? Sometimes, the most profound discoveries don't arrive with fanfare and celebration, but in quiet moments of recognition. An archaeologist brushing sand from a stone carving pauses as they realize the pattern beneath their fingers shouldn't exist. A marine biologist studying sonar readings sees structures on the ocean floor that seem to whisper of purpose. Welcome back to our journey into the mystery of Lemuria. Last night, we explored the dreams and visions that first gave this lost continent its name, its story, its place in our collective imagination. But tonight, we dive deeper. We'll explore what the Earth itself might be trying to tell us about our ancient past. You know, there's something deeply moving about the way the ocean holds its secrets. Unlike the land, which weathers and erodes and changes with each season, the sea preserves. It cradles. It keeps safe those things we thought we had lost forever. And in recent decades, as our technology has grown more sophisticated, as we've learned to peer into the ocean's depths with new eyes, we've begun to see things, structures, patterns, arrangements of stone that seem to suggest someone was here before us. Someone who built with purpose, with intention, with an understanding of engineering that perhaps we're only now beginning to rediscover. Let me take you to the southern coast of India, to the Tamil lands where the Bay of Bengal meets the Indian Ocean. Here, where fishing boats have pulled their nets for thousands of years, local legends speak of Kumari Kandam, the Dragon Continent, a vast landmass that once extended far south into what is now open ocean. The Tamil poets wrote of this lost land with such specificity. They described its rivers, the Kumari and Puruli, flowing through fertile valleys. They named its mountains, its cities, its kings. But most importantly, they said it was the birthplace of Tamil civilization itself, the place where language was born, where poetry first took flight, where the earliest academies of learning flourished for thousands of years. Now, you might think this is simply mythology, the way all cultures create origin stories to explain their past. But here's what's fascinating. In 2001, marine archaeologists working off the coast of Gujarat made a discovery that sent ripples through the scientific community. 25 miles offshore, at depths of 40 meters, they found something unexpected. A vast underwater city, complete with what appeared to be residential complexes, public baths, granaries, and a sophisticated drainage system. The initial dating suggested this city, which they called Dwarka, after the legendary city of Lord Krishna, was over 9,000 years old. 9,000 years. That would make it contemporaneous with the end of the last ice age, when sea levels were rising dramatically, when coastlines were shifting, when entire continents might have disappeared. But Dwarka isn't alone in its underwater solitude. Off the coast of Japan lies Yonaguni, a massive underwater structure that has puzzled researchers for decades. Some see it as a natural rock formation, carved by currents and time, but others see deliberate construction, steps too regular to be accidental, angles too precise to be random, and carved symbols that seem to speak of intelligence, of purpose. Professor Masaaki Kimura, who has spent years studying Yonaguni, believes it represents the remains of a 5,000-year-old city. He points to features that seem unmistakably artificial: carved drainage channels, ceremonial platforms, and even what might be representations of animals or human faces. And then there are the stories the local Okinawan people tell. Stories of a time when their islands were connected to a much larger landmass. Stories of advanced civilizations that existed before the Great Floods came. Stories that sound remarkably similar to the legends of Lemuria. But perhaps the most intriguing evidence comes not from any single discovery, but from the patterns we see when we step back and look at the bigger picture. The distribution of megaliths across the Pacific and Indian Oceans. The similarities in ancient languages that should have no connection to each other. The shared symbols and myths that appear in cultures separated by thousands of miles of open water. Dr. Arizio Santos, a Brazilian geologist who spent decades studying Lemuria and Atlantis, proposed something remarkable. He suggested that as the last ice age ended, as massive ice sheets melted and sea levels rose by over 400 feet, entire continental shelves were submerged. Places where millions of people might have lived, worked, and built civilizations simply disappeared beneath the waves. And you know what's beautiful about this theory? It doesn't require catastrophic destruction. No angry gods, no cosmic punishment, just the natural breathing of the earth, the slow rhythm of ice and water, advance and retreat, that has shaped our planet for millions of years. But those who survived, those who fled to higher ground as their ancient homelands disappeared beneath the rising seas, they would have carried with them memories, stories, technologies, spiritual practices. They would have become the seed populations that gave rise to the civilizations we know about. The ones that built pyramids and stone circles and astronomical observatories that still take our breath away. This would explain so much, wouldn't it? The sudden appearance of sophisticated civilizations around the globe. The shared knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, architecture. The universal flood myths. The persistent legends of teacher gods who came from across the sea, bringing wisdom and hope. And speaking of shared knowledge, let me tell you about something that's been puzzling researchers for years. The presence of cocaine and tobacco in Egyptian mummies. Now, these are New World plants. They shouldn't have existed in the Old World until after Columbus. But there they are, preserved in the tissues of pharaohs who died thousands of years before the Americas were supposedly discovered. How do we explain this? Trade routes across vast oceans? Or the remnants of an even older network, a global civilization that connected continents we now think were isolated? Then there are the maps. The Piri-Reis map of 1513, showing the coastline of Antarctica as it would appear without ice. The Orontius Phineas map of 1532, depicting Antarctica with rivers and mountains in locations that match what we've discovered using modern ice-penetrating radar. Maps that seem to preserve knowledge from a time when these frozen lands were warm and green. Charles Hapgood, the Harvard professor who studied these anomalous maps, concluded that they were copies of much older source maps that might have originated with a seagoing civilization that existed at the end of the last ice age. A civilization that had mapped the entire globe. Could this have been the legacy of Lemuria? The surviving fragments of a worldwide maritime culture that understood the planet in ways we're only now beginning to rediscover? Modern geology tells us that the ocean floor is far from static. Underwater volcanoes rise and fall. Continental margins shift and subside. What we think of as permanent is actually fluid, changeable. And if the ocean floor can rise, creating islands and continents, then surely it can sink as well, taking entire worlds with it. The Kerguelen Plateau in the southern Indian Ocean was once above sea level, a continent-sized landmass that existed for millions of years before slowly sinking beneath the waves. The Seychelles microcontinent, the Mascarene Plateau. These are the remnants of what were once much larger land masses. And beneath the Pacific, the ocean that the Polynesians call their highway, their ancestral sea. Beneath these blue depths lie mountain ranges and valleys that rival anything we see on the continents. The Mendocino Ridge, the Murray Fracture Zone, the Emperor Seamounts, names that sound almost familiar, as if we're unconsciously reaching for something just beyond memory. But you know what strikes me most about all this evidence? It's not about proving or disproving the existence of Lemuria as some specific historical place. It's about opening our minds to the possibility that human civilization is far older, far more complex, far more interconnected than we've been taught to believe. Every discovery of an underwater city, every anomalous artifact, every piece of ancient knowledge that seems to come from nowhere, it whispers the same message. We are not the first. We are not the most advanced. And we are certainly not alone in time. And perhaps that's the real treasure of Lemuria. Not gold or crystals or advanced technology, but humility. The understanding that we stand on the shoulders of countless generations who watched the same stars, wondered at the same mysteries, and dreamed the same dreams of understanding our place in the cosmos. Indigenous peoples around the world have always known this. The Aboriginal Australians speak of the dream time, when the ancestors walked both the physical and spiritual worlds simultaneously. The Hopi tell of previous worlds that were destroyed and renewed in endless cycles. The Maya wrote of multiple creations, each more evolved than the last. These aren't primitive superstitions. They're sophisticated understandings of deep time, of the cyclical nature of existence, of the way consciousness and matter dance together across eons we can barely imagine. And maybe, just maybe, that's what we're rediscovering now. Not the specific location of Lemuria, but the Lemurian way of seeing. The ability to perceive the connections between all things. The wisdom to understand that what we call lost is simply transformed. Because every time we dive deeper into the mystery, every time we uncover another piece of the puzzle, we're not just discovering our past. We're remembering our potential. The recognition that we are capable of so much more than we've allowed ourselves to believe. Tomorrow night, we'll explore something even more fascinating. The people who claim to remember Lemuria. not through books or archaeological evidence, but through something deeper, something that speaks to the part of us that knows we've been here before, that recognizes the truth even when the mind can't explain it. But for now, let yourself sink gently into those warm, ancient waters we explored last night. Feel the pressure ease as you descend deeper into rest. And as you drift toward sleep, imagine yourself swimming through the ruins of that underwater city, not as an intruder, but as someone coming home. What knowledge do you suppose sleeps in the depths of your own consciousness? And what ancient wisdom might surface if you simply allowed yourself to remember? Have you ever experienced a moment of recognition? Not déjà vu exactly, but something deeper. You're in a place you've never been before, yet somehow you know where the path leads. You know how the light will fall at sunset. You know the sound the wind makes through those particular trees. Tonight, we enter perhaps the most mysterious territory of our Lemurian journey. We're going to meet the rememberers, the people who don't just study Lemuria from books or archaeological evidence, but who claim to carry its memory within them, in their dreams, in their meditations, in quiet moments when the veil between worlds grows thin. You know, there's something profoundly humbling about listening to someone describe a place they've never been to, yet somehow know intimately. The way they speak of Lemurian gardens, not with the uncertainty of imagination, but with the quiet certainty of memory. Dr. Shirley Andrews spent over 20 years collecting these memories, not through hypnosis or suggestion, but simply by listening, creating safe spaces where people could share experiences they'd often never spoken aloud. Experiences that, she discovered, shared remarkable consistencies. The tall, willowy beings with elongated skulls and luminous eyes. The crystal cities that seemed to grow rather than be built. The floating gardens and the temples where sound itself was used to heal and transform. One woman, a kindergarten teacher from Oregon, described her recurring dreams with such specificity that Dr. Andrews began to map them. She spoke of a valley surrounded by 7 mountains, where rivers of the purest water flowed between groves of trees that bore fruit unknown to our modern world. She described the priests who taught through music, creating harmonies that could open portals between dimensions. And when Dr. Andrews shared these descriptions with others began to nod in recognition. Yes, they would whisper, "I know that place. I've been there in my dreams." Now, the skeptical mind might say this is simply the power of suggestion. People sharing similar fantasies, unconsciously influenced by popular descriptions of Atlantis or other mythical realms. But here's what's fascinating. Many of these rememberers had never read about Lemuria before their experiences began. They were children when the dreams started. Children who spoke of their other home with a longing that puzzled their parents. Dr. Patricia Pereira, who worked extensively with children's past life memories, documented dozens of cases where young ones would spontaneously speak of Lemuria. They would draw maps of continents that didn't exist, describe technologies that wouldn't be invented for decades, and express homesickness for a place their rational minds had never heard of. One little boy, barely 5 years old, drew picture after picture of what he called the singing stones, great crystals arranged in geometric patterns that, he said, could heal any sadness, solve any problem. When his mother asked where he'd seen such things, he looked at her with those serious eyes that children sometimes have and said, "Before I came here, Mama, when I lived in the place that went to sleep under the water." How do we explain such things? How do we account for the uncanny consistency of these memories, the way they seem to cluster around certain themes, certain ways of being that feel both ancient and somehow futuristic? Perhaps the most remarkable modern rememberer is Aurelia Louise Jones, who claimed to channel communications directly from the Lemurians themselves. According to her experiences, when Lemuria sank beneath the Pacific waves, not all of its inhabitants perished. Some retreated to underground cities, to dimensional realms that exist parallel to our own. She described Mount Shasta in Northern California as one of the primary gateways to these hidden realms. The mountain, she said, houses a vast underground city called Telos, where hundreds of thousands of Lemurians continue their evolution, waiting for humanity to remember its true nature. And you know what's beautiful about this? Whether or not we take these claims literally, they point to something profound, the sense that we are not alone, that somewhere, somehow, there are beings of wisdom and compassion who haven't given up on us, who are holding space for our awakening. The stories that emerge from these channeled communications speak of Lemurian society with such gentleness. No wars, no competition, no scarcity. Instead, a civilization based on what they call unity consciousness, the understanding that all beings are interconnected, that harming another is literally harming oneself. They describe their governance not as rule by force or even democracy as we know it, but as counsel by wisdom, decisions made through meditation and consensus, with the good of all beings, not just humans, but animals, plants, even the mineral kingdom, taken into account. Their technology, they say, was based on harmony rather than domination. Instead of mining and manufacturing, they worked with crystals that amplified natural energies. Instead of vehicles that burned fuel, they used sound frequencies to levitate and transport themselves across vast distances. And their healing practices. They understood that illness begins in the emotional and spiritual bodies before manifesting physically. So they addressed the root causes: fear, separation, the forgetting of one's divine nature. They used color and sound and crystal resonance to remind each being of their inherent wholeness. Now, I know this might sound like pure fantasy to some, but here's what strikes me as profound about these descriptions. They don't glorify the Lemurians as gods or superhuman beings. Instead, they present them as what we might become, as the natural evolution of consciousness when fear is replaced by love, when separation is replaced by unity. And perhaps that's why these memories are surfacing now, in our time of great transition. Not as escapism from our current challenges, but as blueprints, reminders of possibilities we carry in our cellular memory, our soul's DNA. Dr. Michael Newton, who spent decades researching between life experiences through regression therapy, found that many souls describe choosing to incarnate now specifically to participate in humanity's awakening. They speak of having lived in more harmonious civilizations, not just Lemuria, but Atlantis, and other worlds we can barely imagine, and coming back now to help us remember that we've done this before, that we know how to live in peace, in balance, in harmony with the earth and with each other. But perhaps the most moving aspect of the Lemurian rememberers is not their extraordinary claims, but their profound gentleness. The way they speak of these experiences with humility rather than grandiosity. The way they seem to carry within them an almost unbearable compassion for our struggling world. They don't claim to have all the answers. They don't position themselves as gurus or saviors. Instead, they simply hold space. They remember beauty when the world seems dark. They remember peace when everything feels chaotic. They remember love when fear seems overwhelming. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's exactly what our world needs right now. The indigenous elders have a beautiful teaching about this. They say that in times of great change, the ancient ones, the ancestors, they draw closer to the veil between worlds, not to interfere, but to remind us that we carry their wisdom in our bones, their strength in our hearts. And perhaps that's what's really happening with all these Lemurian memories. Perhaps it's not about literal past lives or channeled communications, but about the awakening of our deepest wisdom, the remembering of who we really are beneath all the forgetting. Because when you listen to these rememberers speak, when you hear the longing in their voices as they describe their true home, you realize they're not really talking about a place. They're talking about a way of being, a state of consciousness where love is the natural response, where unity is simply obvious. And maybe that's the real message of Lemuria. Not that there was once a perfect civilization that we lost, but that there's a perfect potential that we carry, that lives in the spaces between our thoughts, in the pause between breaths, in those moments when we forget to be afraid and remember to love. The Lemurians, according to the rememberers, didn't disappear. They didn't fail or fall or face some cosmic punishment. They simply evolved, transformed, moved to a different frequency of existence while leaving seeds of their consciousness scattered throughout our world, waiting for the right conditions to bloom. And those seeds are us. We are the Lemurian children, carrying their dreams forward into a new age. We are the ones they were waiting for, the ones they trusted to remember when the time was right. Tomorrow night, we'll explore how this ancient wisdom is manifesting in our modern world. The communities and movements that seem to be rebuilding Lemuria, not as a physical place, but as a way of living that honors both the earth and the stars. But for now, let yourself sink into that knowing place inside you. That place that recognizes truth not through facts and figures, but through resonance. Through the way certain ideas make your soul sing. And as you drift towards sleep, ask yourself, what do you remember? What landscapes call to you in dreams? What kind of world makes your heart feel home? The rememberers say that Lemuria lives wherever beings choose love over fear, unity over separation, wisdom over the forgetting of who we really are. What version of paradise do you carry in your cellular memory? And what would it look like if you chose to remember it into being? There's something magical about watching seeds sprout. The way life force pushes through dark soil, reaching always toward the light. And sometimes, if you're quiet enough, patient enough, you can almost feel the ancient memory stirring. The remembering of what it means to grow, to flourish, to exist in harmony with all that is. Tonight, we explore something extraordinary. We're going to visit the places and communities around our world where the seeds of Lemurian consciousness are quietly taking root, where people are creating ways of living that seem to echo those ancient dreams of harmony, sustainability, and unity. You know, there's something deeply moving about humans who dare to dream of something better, who look at the world as it is and say, what if? What if we remembered how to live differently? What if we could create communities based on love rather than fear, on cooperation rather than competition? In the Scottish Highlands, there's a place called Findhorn. What started as a small caravan park in the 1960s has become something that defies easy explanation. The founders claimed they received guidance from what they called nature spirits, devas and elementals who taught them how to grow 40-pound cabbages in sandy soil, how to create gardens that seemed to thrive on love as much as nutrients. Eileen Caddy, one of the founders, would sit in meditation each morning before dawn, receiving what she described as direct communication from a source of infinite wisdom. The messages were always gentle, always loving. They spoke of humanity's destiny to live in harmony with all kingdoms of nature, to remember our role as gardeners of consciousness rather than conquerors of matter. And the remarkable thing is, it worked. Findhorn became famous not just for its spiritual teachings, but for its practical success. Its organic gardens, its sustainable architecture, its community governance based on attunement and consensus rather than power and control. Visitors from around the world began arriving, many saying they felt called to experience this glimpse of what human community could become when guided by principles that seemed to echo those ancient Lemurian ideals. But Findhorn isn't alone in this quiet revolution. In southern India, there's Oroville, the city of dawn, designed to be a universal town where men and women of all countries can live in peace and progressive harmony, above all creeds, politics, and nationalities. The mother, Mira Alfassa, who guided Oroville's creation, spoke often of consciousness evolution. She believed humanity was on the verge of a fundamental transformation, not just individually, but collectively. A shift from what she called the mental being to the supramental, a way of existence where divisions between self and other, between human and nature, would simply dissolve. And when you walk through Oroville today, when you see the reforestation projects that have turned red earth into green abundance, when you meet the residents from dozens of countries working together on renewable energy and sustainable living, you begin to sense that maybe, just maybe, this transformation isn't just a beautiful dream. The Orovillians don't speak directly of Lemuria, but their charter reads like a manifesto from that ancient consciousness. To realize human unity, it states, to be a bridge between the past and the future. To create a place where the spiritual and material research will be carried out together. But perhaps the most Lemurian-like. Community exists in the hills of northern Italy. Damanhur calls itself a federation of spiritual communities, but visitors often describe feeling like they've stepped into another dimension, a place where art, technology, and spirituality merge in ways that challenge everything we think we know about what's possible. The Damanhurians have carved magnificent underground temples from solid rock, halls of mirrors and stained glass and precious metals that took decades to complete. But more than architectural marvels, these temples serve as research centers for consciousness exploration, places where community members study time travel, plant communication, and what they call selfika, the creation of devices that concentrate and direct spiritual energy. Now, I know this might sound fantastical, but here's what's remarkable about Damanhur. It works. The community is economically self-sufficient, environmentally sustainable, and seems to produce people who radiate a particular quality of presence, joy perhaps, or maybe just the peace that comes from living in alignment with one's deepest values. They've developed their own constitution, their own currency, their own schools where children learn not just academic subjects, but telepathy, meditation, and communication with what they call the plant people. They hold festivals where hundreds of residents dress as angels and fairies and nature spirits, celebrating not as performance, but as genuine expression of their understanding that reality includes dimensions beyond the merely physical. And when researchers study these communities, when they try to understand what makes them successful where so many utopian experiments have failed, they find common threads. The integration of spiritual practice with daily life, the consensus-based decision-making, the deep reverence for nature, the understanding that individual awakening and community harmony are inseparable, but these intentional communities represent just one thread in a much larger tapestry. Around the world, in ways both visible and quietly revolutionary, people are rediscovering ways of living that seem to echo those ancient Lemurian principles. The permaculture movement, with its emphasis on working with natural systems rather than against them. The transition town movement, creating community resilience through local food production and renewable energy. The gift economy experiments, where value flows through generosity rather than scarcity and competition. Indigenous communities that never lost these ways of being are finding themselves sought out by people hungry for wisdom they'd almost forgotten they possessed. The understanding that we are not separate from nature, but expressions of it, that the health of the individual and the health of the whole are the same thing. And then there are the less visible changes. The meditation centers popping up in every city. The yoga studios that speak not just of physical fitness, but of union, the original meaning of the Sanskrit word. The growing interest in sound healing, crystal therapy, energy work, practices that would have seemed right at home in those Lemurian temples of legend. The plant medicine ceremonies where people from all walks of life gather to remember their connection to the living world, to experience directly that consciousness extends far beyond the human realm, that plants and stones and the earth itself are not just alive, but aware, willing partners in the dance of awakening. Now, the cynical mind might dismiss all of this as New Age fantasy, privileged people playing at primitive living while enjoying modern conveniences. But spend time in these communities, speak with these practitioners, and you'll find something genuine, a quality of presence, of peace, of joy that speaks to something deep in the human soul. And perhaps most remarkably, these movements are connecting. The Findhorn community networks with eco-villages in Costa Rica and Japan. Damanhur shares research with consciousness explorers in California and Brazil. Indigenous elders from different continents discover that their prophecies speak of the same time, the same awakening, the same return to harmony. It's as if some ancient signal is being received simultaneously around the globe. A remembering that's emerging not from books or teachings, but from somewhere deeper, from the cells themselves, perhaps, from the DNA that carries not just genetic information, but the memory of how things could be. The Hopi speak of this time as the great purification, when humanity will choose between the road of technology without wisdom and the road of balance. The Maya describe it as the transition from one age of consciousness to another. The Vedic traditions call it the Satya Yuga, the age of truth, and maybe, just maybe, what we're witnessing isn't the birth of something new, but the return of something ancient. The reemergence of ways of living that our souls have always known, that were never really lost, just temporarily forgotten. The communities we've explored tonight don't claim to be rebuilding Lemuria. They're simply trying to live more consciously, more compassionately, more harmoniously. But in doing so, they seem to be manifesting something that feels remarkably familiar, something that whispers of home. Tomorrow, in our final episode, we'll explore what all of this might mean, not just for those who remember Lemuria, but for all of us, for our children and their children, for the future that's always being born in each present moment. But tonight, let yourself imagine. What would your ideal community look like? How would you choose to live if you could design society from the ground up, based on love rather than fear, on cooperation rather than competition? What seeds are you carrying in the garden of your heart? And what might grow if you gave them the light and water of your attention? The Lemurian communities of old are said to have begun exactly this way, with individuals who dared to dream of something more beautiful, something more loving, something more possible. What dreams are stirring to life in you? And what new world might dawn if enough of us chose to remember together? Sometimes the most profound journeys end exactly where they began. Not because we haven't traveled far, but because we've traveled so deep that we've discovered the destination was always within us. We've walked together through 5 nights of mystery, haven't we? From the scientific origins of Lemuria to the archaeological whispers beneath the waves. From the rememberers who carry ancient dreams to the communities planting seeds of a more beautiful world. And now we arrive at perhaps the most important question of all. What does Lemuria mean? For you? For me? For this precious, struggling, magnificent world we call home? You know, there's something profound about the way mystery works on the human soul. It doesn't demand belief. It doesn't insist on proof. It simply invites us to expand, to consider possibilities we hadn't imagined, to remember parts of ourselves we'd perhaps forgotten. And whether Lemuria existed as a physical continent or lives as something deeper, a state of consciousness, a blueprint for possibility, a memory encoded in the very structure of who we are, doesn't really matter, does it? What matters is how the story changes us, how it calls us to something more. Because here's what I've discovered in exploring these mysteries over the years. The power of Lemuria isn't in proving it existed, but in recognizing what it represents. The deep human knowing that we are capable of so much more than we've been taught to believe. That cooperation is more natural than competition. That love is stronger than fear. That we belong. We belong to each other and to this living earth in ways that make separation an illusion. The Lemurian rememberers speak of a time when humans could communicate telepathically, when healing happened through sound and color, when technology worked in harmony with natural forces rather than against them. And the beautiful thing is, we don't have to believe. These things literally happen to recognize that they represent potentials, capacities that may be awakening in us even. Now, scientists are discovering that human consciousness extends far beyond the boundaries of the individual brain, that we share electromagnetic fields, that our hearts entrain with each other, that healing can happen at a distance through intention alone. Quantum physicists speak of non-local connection, of a universe that's more like a vast web of relationships than a collection of separate objects. Indigenous peoples have always known this. The Aboriginal Australians describe the world as a living dreaming, where all beings are expressions of the same consciousness. The Lakota say, Midikui Oyazing, all my relations, acknowledging that we exist in sacred relationship with everything. And maybe that's what's really awakening in our time. Not supernatural abilities, but our natural abilities. The capacities we never lost, but simply forgot how to access. The communities we explored last night aren't trying to recreate some fantasy past. They're experimenting with what becomes possible when we organize society around different assumptions. when we assume abundance rather than scarcity, when we assume cooperation rather than competition, when we assume that every being, human, animal, plant, mineral, has intrinsic value. And the remarkable thing is, it works. Not perfectly, not without challenges, but beautifully enough to offer hope. Proof that other ways of living are not only possible, but more fulfilling than what we've been told is realistic. Joanna Macy, the systems theorist and environmental activist, writes about what she calls the Great Turning, the transition from an industrial growth society to a life-sustaining civilization. She describes it not as a political revolution, but as a shift in consciousness, a remembering of our fundamental interconnectedness with all life. And when you look around our world today, you can see the signs of this great turning everywhere. The young people who refuse to accept that environmental destruction is inevitable. The entrepreneurs creating technologies that regenerate rather than deplete. The healers integrating ancient wisdom with modern understanding. The artists and storytellers offering visions of what could be. The Hopi prophecies speak of a time when the rainbow warriors would come. People of all colors and all nations who would work together to heal the earth. The Vedic texts describe the shift from the Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, to the Satya Yuga, the age of truth and harmony. Different traditions, different languages, but the same essential message. We are living in a time of profound transformation, a time when humanity has the opportunity to remember who we really are. And maybe that's the real gift of the Lemuria story. Not information about the past, but inspiration for the future. The recognition that we carry within us the seeds of paradise, not as some distant reward, but as a way of being that's available right now. Because when you strip away all the theories and evidence and channeled messages, what remains is elegantly simple. The invitation to live more consciously, more compassionately, more connectedly, to treat each other and the earth not as resources to be consumed, but as family to be cherished. The Lemurians, according to the Rememberers, didn't have to work at being spiritual. Spirituality wasn't separate from daily life. It was the foundation of daily life. Every action, every decision, every interaction was guided by the understanding that we are all one. And you know what's beautiful? You don't have to move to an intentional community or study ancient texts or believe in any particular theory about lost continents to begin living this way. You can start right where you are, right now, with the next breath, the next choice, the next opportunity to choose love over fear. What would it mean to treat your body as a temple rather than a machine? To see your work not as drudgery, but as service to the whole? To experience your relationships not as negotiations, but as opportunities for mutual awakening? The ancient mystery schools taught that transformation happens not through dramatic revelation, but through the accumulation of small choices. The decision to breathe more deeply, to listen more carefully, to speak more kindly, to move through the world with greater awareness of the sacred that lives in everything. And perhaps that's why the Lemuria story is surfacing now, in this time of great choice. Because we need to remember that we've faced transitions before, that consciousness has evolved before, that what seems impossible from one perspective becomes inevitable from another. The Rememberers say that Lemuria will rise again, not from the ocean depths, but from the depths of human consciousness, not as a physical place, but as a way of being, a recognition that we are not separate from the paradise we seek. We are its creators, its gardeners, its living expression, and maybe that's why you've been drawn to this story. Maybe your soul recognizes something familiar. Maybe you are one of those ancient ones, returned not to escape this world, but to help transform it, to plant seeds of beauty wherever you walk, to speak words of healing wherever you go, to love with the fierce tenderness of someone who remembers what we're capable of becoming. Because in the end, that's what all these stories are really about. The recognition that we are not victims of circumstances, but creators of reality. That the world we experience is shaped by the consciousness we bring to it. And that when enough of us remember, when enough of us choose to embody love instead of fear, unity instead of separation, everything changes. The quantum physicists tell us that the observer affects the observed. That consciousness isn't separate from reality, but fundamentally shapes it. The mystics have always known this. That prayer isn't asking for something outside ourselves to change, but aligning ourselves with the highest possibilities. And if that's true, if consciousness really does create reality, then every moment we spend in Lemurian consciousness, every choice we make from love instead of fear, every instance we remember our connection to all life, we are quite literally rebuilding paradise, not in some distant future or alternate dimension, but here, now, in the space between this breath and the next, in the quality of attention we bring to this moment, in our willingness to see the sacred in the ordinary miracle of existence. The ancient teachings say that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Maybe Lemuria is our teacher now, not teaching us about the past, but about the eternal present where all possibilities exist simultaneously, where the paradise we seek and the beings we are becoming are one and the same. As our journey together comes to a close, I want to leave you with a question, not to be answered with the mind, but felt with the heart. If you truly knew, that you were an eternal being having a temporary human experience, if you knew that love is the only reality and fear is just a temporary forgetting, how would you choose to live? What gifts would you share? What beauty would you create? What healing would you offer? What version of paradise would you choose to remember into being? The Lemurians say they never really left. They simply transformed, became the wind that stirs the leaves, the light that dances on water, the love that moves through willing hearts. They're the part of us that knows we belong to each other, that remembers we are all expressions of the same consciousness exploring itself through countless forms. And maybe that's the ultimate truth of Lemuria. Not a place we lost, but a way of being we never lost. Not a civilization that sank beneath the waves, but a level of consciousness that lives beneath the surface of awareness, waiting for us to dive deep enough to remember. As you drift into sleep tonight, let yourself sink into those warm, ancient waters one more time. Feel yourself floating in that place where time doesn't matter and love is the only reality. And know that whatever dreams come, whatever visions arise, whatever memories stir in the depths of your soul, you are never alone. You are held by the same love that birthed the stars, that moves the tides, that beats your heart without you having to remember how. You are part of an ancient story that's still being written, a cosmic dream that's dreaming itself awake through you. Welcome home, Ancient One. Welcome to the paradise you never left. Welcome to the Lemuria that lives, wherever love is chosen over fear.